Blessings Disguised, Chapter 2, Leighton Cottages. Built prominently at the crossroads of Pinner Green stands the Starling public house. This well-frequented watering hole is popular with Saturday nighters and weekend cyclists who populate the tables and chairs placed behind the low wall, giving boundary to the pub's frontage. Lined up alongside the road opposite are a row of early Victorian semi-detached cottages, which add charm to the pub's friendly exterior. Fortunately, these have been kept true to their architectural period, displaying neither plastic-covered picture windows or painted brickwork. Number 5, Leighton Cottages, was vacant, having been placed on the market by a local estate agent acting for the property's owner. It had laid empty for a number of weeks, and the agent was eager to sell. A white painted wicket fence accessed this neat little house, beyond which a brick path led to an enclosed porch. Inside, a wood-panelled front door is open to reveal an empty room. The agent's details describe a small, comfortable parlour, its open fire and iron grate set in a tiled surround below a wooden mantel-shelf. The moulded picture rail and ornate skirting complements detailed architraves around the doors. Either side of the chimney breast a shelf, with the lower half draped by a small hung curtain, hiding a narrower shelf below. All these details were the original features and fittings, and quite charming. Opposite, another white painted panelled door opened into a dining room, also provided with its original black cast-iron polished grate, shone by frequent polishing. A tightly curved staircase takes you up to the 2 bedrooms, entranced by a step-up from a small landing. Downstairs, a further door off the dining room leads to a narrow lean-to kitchen, with its working surface, butler sink and draining board lit by windows that look out onto a side passage. At its further end a door reveals a white-painted bathroom. An old ledge and braced door leads out into the garden with brick path, coal shed and garden store, behind which a row of strung raspberry canes line up. An old cast-iron wooden-rollered mangle gives an eye-catching focus point at the end of the garden. In years past, the enclosed area had been planted to form a kitchen garden on both sides of the brick path. It was perfect, and represented for me a longed-for haven. My task now was to set the wheels in motion to buy it. Both neighbours were old and very welcoming, inviting me in on my first visit for a cup of tea. My immediate neighbour was an elderly woman who told me much history of the area, and on the other side an equally old man who offered to place all my bets for me. Eventually I came to know them well, and they made the whole place more intimate, appealing and homelike. I contacted the agent and found out that it was on the market for £56,000. I immediately offered the asking price, which was naturally accepted. Now I had to secure a mortgage and arrange a deposit of £500. I had a long talk with Rita, who agreed that living there would make it simple for the children to keep in touch, being within walking distance of Norwood Drive, and if necessary enable some to live there. A number 183 bus stopped outside the public house, a route which ran from Harrow through North Harrow and Pinner Green to Northwood. This was a further advantage. Now I felt I was really making a constructive move to counter the negative effects of the breakdown in preserving the family unit. Sally's mother advised not letting it be known what I was intending to do, because it would only lead to an almost impossible situation at home. Pressure from Sally, even though she appreciated that it was the only way of ensuring a stabilizing position at Norwood Drive. Therefore, I just had to be patient and let the purchase continue under its own steam. I got out my paints, painted a picture of the cottage, and imagined my future in my very own home and the peace that it would afford me. I approached the National Westminster Bank for a mortgage, who promised that they would lend the money, but only after seeing my separation papers. Rita offered to lend me the £500 deposit. My quest was almost over. All I had to do now was to buy the house and move in. How naive I was. A few weeks later, just before I was to buy, the bank called in the loan and refused to sanction any payment. The bank believed that I did not have sufficient capital or salary to warrant such a loan. My security was suspect. I immediately contacted a friend, Keith, who ran an insurance business. He was also going through his own rather messy divorce settlement, and he arranged a mortgage through one of his lenders, Guardian Assurance. I did not fully understand what I was letting myself in for, because, panicked by the bank and their attitude, I didn't realize or really understand what future hardships this would bring. The crippling mortgage rate. It transpired that the Guardian wanted 17.5% interest. With that kind of repayment and maintenance bill, I was volunteering to pay. Things were going to be very tight. Still, it was a done deal. Within a few days, I would be the new owner. I just had to extract myself from Norwood Drive without any theatricals and upsets. Rita suggested that it should be done without fuss, so that is what I tried to do. And one afternoon in July, I loaded up the car and left my past behind me. I was very sad to be going, especially my not being able to explain to the children why or to say goodbye. I wondered then, did I expect any word of support since the disclosure? And if I had, would that have been an act of criticism or censure to their mother? I was never to know. That evening, before I left forever, in June 1981, I had a long talk with Sally, to find out if she was still resolved to carry on seeing her friend. I explained what I thought would happen if the divorce was made, which I believed would occur in 8 months. It was not that I was clairvoyant or trying to be smart, but it was obvious to me that it would all end in a great deal of unhappiness, especially for us. Although I said this and believed the divorce would cause problems, I was resolved to improve my circumstances, to do everything in my power to lead a better life, be happier. I could see quite clearly that in the event of some, if not all, the children marrying, the offspring would be without the steadying influence of grandparents and extended family. There would be no joint decisions made for their education and no discipline to see to it that they would continue their piano practice and homework. I also outlined what would be the result to our relationship with our friends, that we wouldn't be able to see them together, and if apart, would make for divided loyalties and possible friction. Sally didn't believe me, saying that she would be able to cope. As to my final words, I said that I loved her and always would, and that would come about was very sad, considering all that we had achieved and endured. With these words, we went to bed. The next day I would be moving out to start a new life, and hopefully the children would visit me, and perhaps move in. The next day, when everyone was out, at work or at school, I started loading up the car, taking great care that none of the neighbours were watching, piling the excess, including the mattress, onto the car's roof and tying it down. Fortunately, Leighton Cottages was only 3 miles down the road, with a racing pulse rate, set in motion by a heady mixture of being excited, sad and worried, first one and then all together. I set off, making my way to my new home. I felt very exposed, slightly nervous and highly embarrassed, in case I met someone I knew. I drew up outside and started to unload, fighting my way into the house, hauling the heavy double mattress through the living room, up the winding narrow staircase into the bedroom. Well, that's what I was meaning to do, but I found myself stuck halfway up the stairs, unable to go up in either direction. It was so heavy and unyielding. At last I crawled out from underneath and dragged it up the remaining stairs, one step at a time, planting it with relief onto the floor. It was as well that the divan section folded in half, allowing me to cut them apart. I never did sew them together again. Attacking the problem of the stairs in the same manner, hauled each part up, step by step, one at a time, and by the time I had emptied the car and put everything away, I was completely done in. I was shaking like a leaf, not just from the energy used, but recognizing the decisive moment. I was on my own for the first time in my life. I looked about me at what I'd done, gathering all my little pieces around me to make a new life. These possessions were the sum of my life, nearly 25 years of struggle, travelling up to London every day, working the maximum amount of overtime, one of the highest paid workers and managers in the printing industry. Not a very auspicious result. I didn't tell anyone, on the advice of Rita, who knew all my plans, which I was making a new home for all those who wanted to come and live with me. She said it would only make parting difficult if you tried to explain it all. Continuing, said, within a couple of weeks, when you're settled in, I will let everyone know, giving me a chance to get the place shipshape to receive my first visitors. I worked hard all that summer holiday, particularly on the outside, to make the structure weatherproof and secure for the coming winter. I was up on the roof, replacing slates, repairing gutters and downpipes, repointing brickwork, and finally ended up painting the house. Inside, I redecorated too, replacing the curtains, hung pictures, and rewired some electric points in the kitchen. Those fine, sunny days went all too quickly. For the first time in many years, I was very engrossed in achieving all my goals to make this the very snuggest, securest home ever. The garden had to be tidied, and I had to convert the coal and tool shed into a retouching studio. And all this time I had to continue to work part-time to bring in the extra cash, which goaded me to work even harder, and that was the goal, to make the place so attractive and homely that the youngest children would be drawn to its comfort and security. Pacey, Rita's sister, bought me a radio and tape player, which I still have and treasure. My next set of 4 tapes I still remember, for they kept me sane in periods of stress. One was a piano solo of all the well-known classical composers, another of Sidney Thompson's old-time melodies, which reminded me of my life at home with my parents, and a third which was a current pop tune by Shack Attack called, I believe, Trucking. And my final tape was of Manhattan Transfer. Rita provided some linen. Stan brought me down some towels and spare utensils. The Lions Club, through the welfare department at Rayners Lane, provided second-hand furniture. I was now all set for a new life. The coal house produced enough coal for the first summer and following winter. On cold evenings I lit the fire, played my tapes, and listened to my radio, enjoying my cup of tea or coffee with a cigarette sitting on my 2-seater settee in front of the fire which crackled in the grate. Rita was my first guest, and she brought with her a friend, and all together we looked at every room, at every new possession, and every item of furniture, lovingly polished and arranged carefully. My little home had to be tidied and swept, dusted and washed, to show it off to its best advantage. Raspberries out of the garden, with cream and sponge cake on the cake stand made for the occasion. They were highly impressed. The smell of coffee percolated the rooms, and the fire crackled in the hearth. Rebecca came round with loads of homework, which she did sitting at the dining-room table, speaking with her friends on the telephone to find out what they were doing and constructing her homework as she went along. She was my most frequent visitor. Her voice gave the house a familiar ring, gave me company, and made the transition so much easier. Occasionally she stayed overnight at the weekends. It was a treat for me to have her there for breakfast and to fuss around her. My freelance work was continuing well. The tool shed was now converted into a studio, and all the chemicals and dishes were in place. Lines for drying films were strung across the walls, and a blow heater speedily got them dry. That year I replaced my Ford Cortina estate for a later saloon model bought from Pauline, Stan's wife, which had been a used car from Stan's workplace. And it was about this time that Rita asked for her money back, the £500 she had loaned me to buy Leighton Cottages. At that time I was paying a voluntary divorce settlement of over £174 per month, which was enormous, and I was continually falling in arrears with. Frankly, something had to give, although the freelance work I was doing made all the difference. Just about enabled me to make some sort of payment, to not only Sally, but her mother too. That September 1981, just before I started back to college after the summer break, the social welfare officer phoned to ask if she could come round to see how I was getting on. I was pleased to make a date, which she kept the following week. I had my little house, ship-shape and Bristol fashion, fire-lit and coffee on. We settled down after showing her proudly round, pointing out all that I had achieved that summer. We discussed the whole situation, how things were shaping up, and who had visited. All that had happened, and who had visited me since I had left my previous home 3 months before. She said that she was pleased that it had all worked out fine, and that she could see I was coping well. However, she and the Harrow Social Services would like me to return to 68 and take up where I'd left off. I asked her what was different now. Why were they asking this? She went on to say, events had proved you right, that they had been wrong. Deceived, believing Mrs. Carey when she had said I only leave the home to get away from my husband. Mrs. Carey was leaving the young children alone in the evenings and at night, that the older children left in charge weren't responsible, and that they, the social services, were concerned at the breakdown of discipline and care in the home. At last, I thought, the social services had come to their senses. I had told them all along that they should have looked into the situation more thoroughly. She, the welfare officer, had not believed what I had been saying, and had caused the problem in the first place. It was, however, perfectly true that I should have seen them after the third child had been born, when Sally had wanted to increase still further the size of the family. That had been irresponsible, weak and thoughtless on my behalf, taking the easy way out by letting Sally eventually get her own way. Nevertheless, that was now all water under the bridge. Here I was faced, I thought, by a situation which would get me back in charge, so that I could bring order out of chaos and get the whole show back onto the road. Keep the younger children in the home, doing their homework and not away, where temptations could easily lead them astray. I told the welfare officer that I would be perfectly happy to sell up and go back to 68 Norwood Drive, but if I did, would they in turn give me their support? She asked me what sort of support would I need. I told her that I wouldn't want Mrs. Carey in the house. That would only lead to disruption. The welfare officer replied, I've got no authority to ask Mrs. Carey to leave. You will have to go back under your previous arrangements, or not at all. My reply to that was, you made the mistake, and you put the matter right. This was most disappointing and discouraging. I told her that, What she had been saying was unreasonable. I had been right in my assessment of the situation. I had had to leave my home and buy another house, furniture and utensils. This meant leaving all that I'd built up for the children who needed my support. What she was asking me to do was to go back, but not to have any authority. I continued by asking her to look around, see how I was placed, how I liked to live, in what circumstances and in what condition. What I needed was goodwill by all parties to ensure maximum cooperation. I went on to say, because what they had been asking was unworkable, I would have to say no to her request. With that, she left, never to be in touch again, understanding that there was no other course of action left for any of us. Sally controlled the situation, would never give up the house, move, change her mind, or let go of the young children. And all these things were unthinkable. She was incapable of letting go of anything, racked by possessiveness and insecurity. Gradually things worked out. I got used to walking to the Pinner station to get the train to the Elephant and Castle, where I taught most days. The return journey was wonderful, going to my own home, making up the fire with my own things around me. The freelance work had to be finished, ready for the next edition, and perhaps Rebecca would be round. That Christmas, 1981, was my first alone. I don't remember anyone coming round or receiving any invitations except by the neighbours, and I was very glad I had my own home, the fire lit. The room with its dancing flames was now a sparkling, nice, clean place to live. My new second-hand black-and-white television set, received from the Harrow Lions Club, was my latest addition, and my world was thus a considerable improvement on the previous Christmas. I hung paper decorations, put up fairy lights, and set up a tree. My home was all very cheery and snug. My dear neighbours were ever on hand with a welcoming cup of tea and a friendly word. This contributed towards my feeling of belonging. Further up the road, a young couple invited me in for a Christmas drink. He was a builder and ran his own company in league with his father. They were building an extension to his house, which was similar to my own, and naturally he wondered if I too would be interested in building on, installing a new kitchen, upstairs bathroom and further bedroom. I looked over his plans and could see the potential. I agreed that their idea and suggestions were reasonable and would fit in. I told them then I had no money and how I was placed with my mortgage. They were astounded by the amount I was paying and the rate of interest. The wife immediately went round to another neighbour who was invited in. He worked at the head office of Abbey National Building Society in London. He was shown my figures and personal details, upon which he declared that he could easily arrange not only another mortgage for the original sum, but an additional amount for the proposed extension. If I succeeded in £80 a month, would reduce obtaining this new mortgage would make my outgoings so much easier to afford. What fantastic news! But how annoying that I had been paying over the odds for something when it was not necessary. All because I had relied upon a so-called friend. Eventually the plans were drawn up, permission was granted, and a date set for when the building work was to start. It was all very exciting and gave me an enormous fillip. The Conservative government sought a drastic reduction of coal. Pits closed and production lines reduced. The miners went on strike, which resulted in hardship, poverty, violence and frustration. Thatcher demanded the industry to be self-supporting, a rational, if difficult, and unkind goal. The unrest continued well into the 80s. The period was termed the Age of Discontent. Sexual behaviour for women gradually underwent almost total liberation. Virginity declined. It was recorded that almost 50% of all 16-year-olds had admitted to an affair, that 26% of fewer than 21s claimed their first sexual experience before the age of 16. 30 years before, these figures would have been just over 5%. The Social Democratic Party formed in 1981, and the following year the Falklands War began. Prince Charles married Diana, and inflation fell steadily. Unemployment reached over 3 million, and too many of these jobs were lost entirely, mostly by men from manufacturing.